Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope that you've been enjoying your afternoon sessions as well as the morning sessions as much as I have. I know that I've been getting great feedback from the networking events as well as from the comment section. So thank you so much for staying engaged. Normally I'd be emceeing, but this is actually a panel that I'll be moderating, which is going to be amazing and awesome and hella cool. And we're going to be talking about innovation for sustainability and kind of concentrating around, what are the new technology solutions that are key to meeting sustainability targets? Without innovation, water and energy systems remain stuck in the past. And so we're going to be speaking with our lovely panelists today as they talk about how best we can deploy the role of technology in these solutions and find sustainable infrastructure and innovative water and energy systems. And with that, I'm going to pass the torch over to Nancy to introduce herself before the rest of the panelists and just dive right on in.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here. I love this conference. It's one of the best. I am Nancy Bui-Thompson. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Sacramento Municipal Utility District here in Sacramento. We are the country's sixth largest public utility. This is my 12th year on the board and proud to be here and bring forth some of our great ideas from our team here at SMUD.
Great, thank you so much. Andrea?
Hi, everyone, and thank you to the C-Prime team to having me here. I'm Andrea Rotolo. I'm the Senior Director of Grid Modernization and Innovation at Liberty Utilities. We own electric, water, and gas utilities across the US and Canada, and also Chile and Bermuda. And I look forward to talking about innovation today with all of you.
Great, thank you so much. And Shay?
Hi, also I'll repeat the thanks to the Z-Prime team for the conference, pretty awesome one. My name is Seyi Fabode, CEO and co-founder of Varuna. And at Varuna, we provide distribution system monitoring for small and medium-sized water systems so they can make better operational water quality and financial decisions for their customers at the end of the day. Thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin.
Thanks, Joyce, and bonsoir from France, from the other side of the pond. My name is Kevin O'Donovan. I spend my time looking at new technologies. Now, my background has been in the, let's say, the IT side of the house. I used to head up Intel's sales into the energy sector. But about 3 years ago, I finished up with Intel, and I spend my time now looking at new technologies and innovations, both in digital, chemistry, mechanical, and all sorts of other gadgets. So a lot of innovation going on for sustainability.
You definitely have a lot of gadgets behind you. So we definitely believe that you are who you say you are. Before we get into the questions, for the audience who are watching in, please drop your comments into the section on swap cards so that way we can make sure that our panelists see it at some point. We're going to kind of reserve them towards the end, but we will do our best to address them. And with that, the first question is really about innovations and before we get into that, what innovation projects are you guys currently working on or that you have heard of that you are most excited about?
So anyone can start?
Yeah, anyone.
Okay, I take the lead then. So one of the things I'm most excited about in innovation and sustainability is actually building innovation teams. We talk about the human aspect from time to time, but it seems like we often focus more on the innovative technologies and business models. Technologies and business models and projects are important, of course, but nothing happens without the people doing it. And in the end, the reason we build anything is also for people. So people doing something new or living differently is both the cause of innovation and the outcome. In the industry as a whole, and certainly in our team, we are recognizing the importance of building a lean, nimble teams and providing psychological safety, recognizing individuals' contributions, building in cross-disciplinary perspectives, and inspiring people with a clear vision of an exciting future. So quite a few studies on this that really got started with Amy Edmondson's work at Harvard Business School have shown that psychological safety is one of the most important keys to team performance. And actually Google is one of the companies that did the biggest study on it, for 2 years on their teams. They tracked what happened in teams and what the business outcomes were. And they found that all their highest performing teams had in common a very high degree of psychological safety. Now we have people, right? And then in terms of technologies, some of the exciting projects that I'm working on with my team and are happening in the energy industry are microgrids, battery energy storage systems, and solar plus storage systems to improve reliability and resilience and help to strengthen the grid. Electrification of transportation is a big trend that is accelerating. And for electric mobility to be resilient, it is important to plan vehicle charging and distributed energy systems like microgrids to go together so that people are able to charge their cars even when there is a power outage happening in the traditional grid, right? The last time you want to be unable to charge your car is when there is an emergency situation, like, for example, the widespread fires in California.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I'm really excited about our Sustainable Community Initiative at SMUD. It's gotten a lot of press lately because we're one of the first utilities in the country to really look at how the utility can work throughout our community rather than just the very narrow focus of delivering, the electrons to turn on the lights. And so we are very excited to be a spearhead and major driver in a community, because we see that SMUD is part of our daily lives, but people don't know that we are. They don't know how much we can drive. And so our Sustainable Communities initiative is really a collective of all the organizations and partnerships that have not been brought together in a manageable way. And so we create this program to look at 4 pillars of what we see are, the drivers of our, economy and our community, which is first and foremost social well-being, a healthy environment, a prosperous economy, and mobility. And within the mobility flagship of our strategic partnerships, we have embarked on, again, the first of its kind in the country, which is the California Mobility Center. So with this center, we are resourcing it, we are leading it, we are driving it, where we're bringing together public and private partnerships to foster innovation around everything mobile. So that's EVs, that's AI, it's walkability. So it's not just about the technology, it's how do we build communities that are walkable and accessible, shared mobility programs, public transit, charging stations. So from start to finish, we wanted to bring together all of the best minds in California and from around the world to say, this can be a hub for innovation and development, but no one was leading it. And so SMUD stepped forth and said, we will commit funds, we will, bridge together that strategic partnership and say, we can have a center here in California that brings the best and the brightest to say, hey, we will, work together to have great R&D, but at the same time, how do we work together to commercialize these R&D projects? How do we find the consumer on the back end? How do we work with the cities to implement these innovative priorities? Because it's one thing having an idea, right? And so how do you get the communities, how do you get the public officials, how do you get the government agencies to buy in? And so we're really excited about the CMC, because we find that there's so many great ideas, but how do we bring them to market? How do we bring the right people together? And so, looking forward to growing our partnerships. We have over 100 so far, and excited to see what will come out of all the great, both California innovative ideas and from around the world.
Amazing, Nancy. Thank you so much for sharing the successes of that thus far. And I think we're all pretty eager to see what's going to happen with that. Shay and Kevin, what's exciting to you guys?
Yeah, I'll go. So our focus is on water. So I'll probably only talk about innovation in the water space. And if there's anything I'll say, there's not much we can say that's been positive about COVID. But I will say what it's done for the water industry, which has traditionally been considered as slow in adopting technology. And we have conversations about how water is critical, but we don't really think about it. It's like the ugly stepchild to the telecoms and the power utilities. But what's happened because of COVID is just this increase in adoption of technologies that allow water systems to monitor outside of their treatment plant, which has been monitored all along. Just this willingness to recognize, because they've had to reduce staff size, because they've had to implement reductions in contact work between employees and customers, how can we take some of these readily available tools and approaches, water quality sensors that customers can attach to their taps in their homes, that will let the customer know what the quality of the water is, but also let the utility know so that they can start to triangulate if there's any problem in a certain part of town. I'll throw in our technology as well, where helping them figure out, you know what, there's stagnation in your water because the schools aren't open and the factories around this part of your city aren't open, but you've pumped water into the storage tanks close to that point. How can you modify your hydraulic model so that you can just move water to where everyone is, their homes, and ensure that the quality of the water stays at a standard that customers are happy with? And the last thing I'll touch on is just what is becoming sort of a fundamental rethink of, we ended up with centralized water distribution systems and networks because cities decided to take on the ownership of distributing water, buying it and acquiring it from private companies. There's this fundamental shift in thinking, you know what, maybe what we need, like the electricity grid, micro water supply distribution, micro to the hyperlocal. It could be your home. What is one water in a home? How do we ensure we're not using the same water we've treated to a high quality to water our lawns? It shouldn't be. What is the redesign in the home that we can use to ensure we're not wasting clean water on watering a lawn that it's the winter, it probably won't grow well anyway. So all these things that COVID has accelerated, it's removed a lot of friction from technology adoption in water, and that's just letting innovation thrive. And I'm super excited about that right now.
No, thank you for sharing. That is very valid and incredibly impactful right now. I mean, we're definitely going to be having more of those conversations, not just in summits like these, but just across cities all over the world. Speaking of, Kevin, what's most exciting to you right now?
It's probably no surprise I'm probably coming at it from a technology angle.
No, what?
You know, technology is the easy bit, right? It's when us humans get involved in the politics and the financing and the whatever. That's when it gets complicated. And I suppose that the way I was kind of thinking about it when you say innovation, right? Innovation is relative. And what I mean by that, you have bleeding edge innovation with something completely new to somebody doing something that's innovative for them, and somebody else looks at it and go, well, we were doing that 10 years ago, but whatever, right? So a couple of examples. I suppose the most bleeding edge innovative thing is probably I live in the south of France, and 2 miles from me, they're building ITER, the huge fusion reactor. US, France, Germany, Russia, China, everybody, 35 countries. Now, this thing isn't going to turn on until 2030 or something. But if they get fusion working, right, game changer for everything. So that's innovation, and that there's billions being poured into that. I suppose some of the things that I see happening in both water industry and in the utilities and whatever today is around chemistry. Some of the chemistry work that's being done around new storage technologies, right? Lithium ion is one, but there's lots of others going on. So again, if there's some breakthrough chemical process for energy storage, that could fundamentally change the way we do things. The amount of chemistry, Seyi, you mentioned it in terms of how do I treat water? How do I take things like antibiotics and decontaminants and some of the stuff that's going on in there with membranes and microbiomes and you know, with COVID, they started testing for COVID in the US and Europe, many places, right, in wastewater. The other one that I find fascinating is offshore wind. where the oil and gas companies come in and say, but we've been floating things for years. It's not hard. And the wind guys go, ooh, cool, let's take that technology, and suddenly you have floating wind off Europe and whatever. And I suppose the last one would be, a couple of you mentioned it already, there's been more, let's say, digitalization, call it innovation, in most companies in the past 6 months than there was in 6 years. Now, for someone like me that worked in Intel and Compaq and whatever, we're going, video conferencing, that's not new. It was for half the planet. And that was innovating for them, right? It was probably shocking for them as well. But the innovation happens in there's bleeding edge, and there's stuff that's just happening with people today. So I think the biggest impact right now has been the innovation in digital technologies and remote working, and how do I can't send a team of people out to fix something. How do I train some guy remotely to do it with heads-up display or something? That's innovation.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm really excited to get into more of the meat of the conversation, but I mean, I feel like we could spend a lot of time just talking about each of the things that you brought up, and spend days talking about, the implications of all of that. So thank you. So if you guys who are watching have any questions or comments, please go ahead and drop them in the chat, because we're going to be moving into the nitty gritty, which is what I'm most excited about. So Andrea, you had really talked about, fostering organizational culture, right, in this time. So, fostering organizational cultures around curiosity and creativity can be difficult in legacy industries such as water and utilities, and even when there is support from the top. So how can cities, utilities and communities really support innovation by supporting entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs as they help advance, both innovation and sustainability initiatives?
Thank you for that question. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night thinking about this. So I think that one of the most important things innovators need to work with is data. And probably this is not new to anyone, but I want to reinforce this point, because cities, utilities, communities, and companies can help entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs by providing good, open access to as much data as possible, without, of course, infringing on customers' rights to privacy. We see all the time a few specific problems with data access. Sometimes it is not being collected. With energy data, for instance, that happens a lot with old analog meters that can give a reading of the monthly total energy use, which works okay for billing. But with those old meters, you can't see how energy is used in real time. So the data isn't granular enough to be used for identifying opportunities for efficiency improvements or for getting good visibility into the state of the grid at a given moment. Now, with new advanced metering infrastructure, collects data with a much greater detail. So it can support using AI, for example, to do things like detect problems before they happen for predictive maintenance. So cities, utilities, and communities can help by installing more advanced metering infrastructure or AMI. Then innovators can use that data to develop new solutions and to target upgrades to the grid where they are needed the most. Now, the other most common problem is that the data does exist, right? But it is either not well organized or not made available, or separated into different silos. So it's important to put together a complete picture of the system the data is from. Data needs to be anonymized to protect customer privacy and organized, then made available to innovators to train AI algorithms, to model energy systems, and to design new technologies that will improve grid performance. I want to share with you very briefly a study that was made by, it's a great research topic, something that has been studied at MIT and Harvard, and something that has been proven in a wide range of settings, in energy, but also in healthcare and in finance and other sectors. And this is the concept, it's the core and the crowd. So the core That's us, right? That's the established experts in the sector, that we have access to the data and we know what are the problems that need to be solved. But the crowd, that's everyone with an internet connection. And I mean anyone in the planet, right? That can bring fresh outside the box thinking. And when they are given the data sets to work with and given problem statements to solve, they are able to come up with an order of magnitude improvements over what the core has figured out up to then. So it's really important for those of us in the core to find ways of sharing anonymized data sets and posing problem statements to the crowd. The intrapreneurs who come with fresh thinking to harness their creative energy and potential to create disruptive improvements.
Awesome, thank you. Shay, do you have some insight on this as well?
Yes, I'll quickly touch on. So the way we actually approach it, being the part of the crowd when we come in to work with the core at the utilities that are our customers, is we almost start off with helping them draw these concentric circles of what is your, I guess, core expertise as a utility. It is in the distribution of water in our case. So we won't teach you how to distribute water. What we will do are these, if you draw concentric circles of capability, what we provide to you helps the core, but doesn't infringe on what you know. But it is, we can do these things outside your core a lot better than you can. And when we do that well, with your support, with buy-in internally, and not look at us, because my team, none of us had worked in water before. So we can think about water and improving the work the utility does as part of the crowd, back to your point, Andrea, and be creative about what we do without impacting their core, which is delivering clean water consistently, but actually amplifying their ability to do that as well. So I'm nodding my head because we literally draw those circles in our conversations to figure out what is it you want to do and how can we be helpful to you. So.
Thank you. Kevin?
If I may, I suppose, you know, the whole smart metering one I find fascinating, because from a technology point of view, it's pretty simple, relatively simple, right? There's comms issues and whatever, and water is different to electricity and. But I suppose I kind of come back to this, when humans get involved, it gets complicated. The UK, you know, if you want to find the most complicated, messed up smart meter rollout on the planet, it's a good example. Germany is way behind where they should be. California had a lot of, you know, I remember back in 10 years ago, the lawsuits and the technology issues and whatever. Now, most of it was due to bad communication, right? People were just told you're getting a smart meter and you have to pay for it, and they didn't know why and whatever. So there was a lot of that. But it's kind of baffling that you kind of go, well, how can we make energy more efficient and you use what you want? And how can we stop losses in water systems? Because where I come from in Ireland, about half the water that was pumped in never got to the end because it got so if you don't measure it, how do you know what you're missing? And yet we made it so complicated, and it became a rights thing. And if I may, you know, once you have the data, and yeah, the data has to be anonymized and but then you have companies like Innowatts and SAP and Oracle and they can analyze the you know what out of it. And open data, that gets into the business models and who's going to lose money and who's going to make money and whatever. But again, the technology is relatively easy, but it's how we make it so complicated is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Nancy, I mean, you have an interesting perspective in all of this. So how do you feel about what this kind of innovation?
Sure. So SMUD has been a unique utility in that we are no longer just a customer and a buyer of whatever's on the shelf. And I think that change in mindset that a utility should just be satisfied with what vendors are coming to us with, whether it really meets our requirements or not, or whether they say they meet our requirements or not. And so we made a significant change several years ago that we want to be the innovative generator. And so we created a program called Innovation Generation, which is we partner with vendors, we partner with companies to make whatever product that we're looking for better, because we found that we were settling for less. We found that our innovative minds within SMUD were coming up with great technologies that, yes, they're homegrown, but it's not scalable, right? And so we continue to encourage our internal, great minds and entrepreneurs, but we also realize that that capital, that subject matter expertise is actually worth something. So SMUD was, again, one of the first utilities in the country to embark on this partnership with companies to say, we will take a stake, whether it's royalties or a cut on future contracts. And we had to actually change California law to even allow public utilities to have any sort of partnership or stake in technologies or IE. So it's been an interesting ride, right? We had our own internal R&D, which again, we foster innovation internally and externally, but how do we bring our great minds to the forefront to say, I get all of you vendors think you have the best idea for utilities, but how can we partner? How can we work with you to make that product even better? How do we make it a product where utilities will want to come to you rather than it's a selling game, right? And so that's been a big change and shift that we will continue to innovate with our robust R&D internally and push our employees to come up with great new ideas, either just on a technology side or just process improvement. But how do we take that great human capital that we have and leverage it for our customers? Because I think in the past, I mean, we have some great success stories. SMUD was the first to work with O-Power at the time. It was Positive Energy. And years later, unfortunately, we didn't see an ROI on that. And so we learned, early on that SMUD is valuable, but how do we monetize that with our partners so that it's a win-win situation for both the utility and the company by gaining our expertise? And so I think more utilities need to take a proactive approach rather than a reactive consumer-based approach, because we are the ones using the technology. We're the ones day-to-day working with the customers. We understand their needs and wants and where they want to go. And so we as a sector need to get away from the very cautious way of life and maybe not be on the bleeding edge, but be on the cutting edge and be a driver rather than a passenger in the car of innovation.
Yeah, I think that, that's a really great perspective to bring to the table. It adds a lot of agency into, what's happening for utilities and cities alike, right? Not just being those passive consumers, but in trying to pivot, from some of the experiences that I had working with the city of San Antonio and how they were trying to approach smart city efforts, particularly their, partnership 4.0 sort of concept, where they were really trying to have more of an educational relationship with vendors before they came in and, followed through with requests for information or requests for proposals. And it is a huge mind shift because, the people who were from the industry side that were attending those kinds of sessions were salespeople and business development people who wanted to do presentations and sales pitches. And the city was trying to share information about the challenges and what makes, for San Antonio's communities to be very unique and what they were really looking for as customers. And so that discovery and that curiosity just wasn't necessarily there in all of those conversations. It has since then improved, but it's just a different way of building those relationships. We did have one question come in that I think is a little bit important to just kind of address, because when you're talking about entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, smaller companies and startup companies are not on the same level playing field as utilities and cities. And so how do you figure out, partnerships or business models that do have that win-win, right? So the question that came in is, how is it sustainable for the crowd to do the work without the compensation? And so maybe, Andrea, if you want to address that, that would probably be really great. And then maybe Shay, before we move on.
Right. So there are different models, but one that has been studied, the study that I mentioned previously. So they posed a question this was about sequencing the human genome. And Harvard got to a level of computer timing to get the human genome sequenced. And they decided, why don't we open this up in an open platform called Topcoder? And these were people that had no background in biology. They were undergrad students and they were able to solve it faster. So people from all over the world could compete. They solved it faster. They didn't know what was it about, so they anonymized data. And these people that love to generate algorithms came up with this algorithm that did it better than the core. And they paid for this $10,000. So there are different ways you can incentivize people. Maybe even you can ask the crowd, what would you want to solve this problem? And probably you'll get a diversity of different ways that you can incentivize them to participate. I just know that there's a lot of people out there that are brilliant. They have maybe a background in music and in art and in biology, things, and they just think differently. So why not connecting with that? Actually, today I heard from Paula from CPS Energy, how she opened up this RFI, right, to the entire globe. I just think that's fantastic. That is the way to go. And it has been proven many times, but in terms of incentive, it could be what people want. You just need to ask them.
Thank you. Shay.
Yeah, to just take that point, there's I believe it's called Kaggle. It's this website where companies will put use cases of problems they have. It tends to be technological, and I know the bio side of the world have done a lot of experiments like this. Just throw it out there, attach a prize to it, and individuals or companies can come in and provide solutions that get tested for the efficacy as it matches the. But I'd say though that and innovation, back to Kevin's point earlier, the innovation that I think will succeed in the utility industry right now is probably and is most likely going to be the sort of stuff other industries have tried, tested, and proven to work. Because we're not there as an industry at the point of being bleeding edge or cutting edge enough to throw our problems on a Kaggle. It's just from what I know. Interestingly, I attended some of those San Antonio sessions and conversations where most of the departments came up with slides that indicated these are the things we want to solve, and we reached out to some of those departments that had the problems that matched what we're trying to do, and you get in the room, the will is there, and this is sort of the desire is there, but we still need a fresh set of eyes to assess how to think about solving problems for our utilities, especially in the US. So I'll leave that there. I know we're talking about innovation, but I'll suggest there's still a mindset shift that is required before we really truly get technology adoption at the scale that is needed to solve the problems we have in this industry.
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Could I just make a comment? And Shay, I would agree that, and some of my utility friends will hate me for this, but certainly when it comes to customer engagement, I think the utilities won't be seen as the bleeding edge. They ain't the Apple and the whatever, right? But I would stand up for the energy industry when it comes to things like, say, transmission technologies, the transmission networks, right? They are the bleeding edge because there isn't anyone else doing it. If you look at some of the reservoir modeling stuff that the oil and gas guys have done, that could be potentially used for hydrogen caverns in the future, right? They're out there, right? There's no one else they can go to. So I would say, but it's back to the horses for courses, right? That in some of the technologies for our industry, the industry is it. But when it comes to other disciplines and customer engagement, AI, yeah, we're the utility, and some utilities, I've seen Eon and others talking about quantum computing, right? But they may not have the best quantum computing engineers on the planet. I'm guessing, right? But I do think there's overlap, but it's not that I wouldn't. the utilities, in my personal opinion, sometimes kind of get beaten up and we're the old guys and whatever. And yet the lights have stayed on for 100 years, and there's more IoT in some of the grids today than in other industries.
That have been. So I agree, but I think what I'm suggesting is the utility is innovating at the edge that matters to the utility but when we really say our utilities should become customer centric, we fail. And customer centricity could mean, I think on the water side especially, customer centricity means essentially blowing up your old model because it's not really working anymore. But we're not ready to innovate at that level. Usage shouldn't be the metric by which we assess what value a customer is deriving from the utility, that quantity they use. If we want to move towards sustainability, if we want to move towards just the things we say we want to move towards, we need to detangle, and some utilities are doing that, but we need to detangle how the model has worked from the future we need to see that is focused on customers. So longer conversation, but I agree with you about where there's bleeding edge and where there's room. Yeah.
No, thank you. And I think
Joyce, before you leave, I did want to kind of more focus, because I feel that this person came from, like, how does a small fish get into the big ocean? How does it, these kinds. So I just kind of wanted to refocus, because I think people ask me all the time, how do I get in front of a utility executive? How do I get in the door? I think I just wanted to answer that, because, I always encourage, wherever the company is based, look at who your utility providers are locally. For SMUD, we have a large focus on fostering local innovation and funding local innovation. I think people try to search for the big fish in the world, right? And they oftentimes always come to SMUD first. And I would recommend any new small company, look in your backyard. Look for those local partnerships with either other companies that are symbiotic with you. Look at your local utilities, water and energy. See if you can pitch them. See if we have forums, so we don't make it hard for people to come pitch us. We have a meet the buyer, conferences where we invite all businesses in the community to come to us and understand our needs and see if we match. I'm sure other utilities do the same. I know my staff, we speak at conferences, and we are always keeping our eye out for that little guy, that little technology that maybe no one knows about. And so we send our staff to conferences, so present, submit papers, submit ideas. I'm going to plug the Z Prime guys. They have a great startup contest. I've judged several and brought those companies. And now we have partnerships with these companies that no one's ever heard of, but because we saw something in them, because I met them at a startup pitch contest, that I said, we should give them a shot. And so for these small companies that are looking for a foot in the door, you really need to think about, how can you partner? How can you expose yourself? How can you, find those opportunities to share whatever your goals and dreams are with people who are buying? Because that, at the end of the day, if you don't get somebody to take a chance on you, whoever, if it's a small utility or a big utility, you're not going to go anywhere, right? And so the more that you can expose yourself, the more that you can bring those connections forward. I sit on panels with VCs where they'll bring us some of our top hot ideas that may not even be utility space companies, but they'll bring to us their kind of bevy of, hottest companies to say, hey, let's just start thinking about how maybe the utility, even though this technology was not designed for the utility, but can you leverage this? And so I encourage, all avenues, local and large, so that these small companies can try to find those partnerships, because the partnerships are how you're going to move forward.
And to add to what Nancy just said, and I think it was a few weeks ago that Jigar Shah, he said, entrepreneurs should be selling painkillers instead of vitamins. Right? So talk to people that work in innovation and modernization in the utility space. Ask them, what's the pain that you have these days? And focus your solutions there. Because if there's an unresolved issue, that's where you have an opportunity.
No, thank you. Nancy, thank you for sort of refocusing back to the little fish. I think that it's a multi-layered thing, just like in almost all of the problems that we're facing in innovation and sustainability, whether you're talking about energy or water utilities or smart cities or name it, which is that there's a lot of layers to why we're seeing some of these barriers. Because to Kevin's point, it's not about the technology. It really isn't. It's about so many of these other things that are coming into place. And I know that some smaller companies and startups can really struggle with putting their ideas out there for fear of, you know, generating IP or generating innovation that others that are more capable and could run with it without them. And so that's always the balance. You know, I have a background in startups as well. And so I've seen tons of pitches or tons of conversations where, you know, how do you talk about what you're doing without giving away the secret sauce? And I think that that's just the balance that we all have to figure out for ourselves. But moving on, because we do have about, you know, 20 minutes left in the conversation. So we have a couple more questions we need to dig into a little bit more, which is, Nancy, I think this is a really great one for you to kind of kick it off, which is, you know, that not all cities look the same, right? In terms of size or funding and industry support. How are companies currently meeting communities where they're at, and how are they laying a solid foundation that can build gradually, right, as we start allocating more of these resources to find additional support for innovation, sustainability, especially, you know, as we're looking at COVID-19?
So as I mentioned before, you know, really taking a lead in terms of bringing together those partnerships and having a hub, having a place where you can bring those best of minds, both from the private industry and from the public space, right? Because if you don't have a convener, everybody's just trying to jockey for a position, right? They're just trying to get their product or their thing or their community want, right? Or community need, especially with COVID now. I mean, some jobs will just not come back, or if they come back, they won't be the same. And so what SMUD has focused on is how do we help grow the economy, right? So how do we help grow the local workforce? So a lot of that is investment and funding and retraining and retooling careers. And so we've, as a big pillar and a focus of our California Mobility Centers is that job re-education, job training, you know, access to the right tools, access to the right education, and then how do we actually help them get jobs afterwards? Because it's one thing saying we're going to retrain a population of people, but how do we connect them with the companies? And so having it as, you know, one umbrella, one stop shop with our mobility center, we're really looking at the whole life cycle of the community. How do we foster development? How do we foster the next wave of entrepreneurs, but also the next wave of employees? And so, you know, as we look at all the various components, we need to focus on, you know, how do we move forward from COVID, but also realize that the world has changed in terms of what jobs and how we work, how we use electricity. I mean, we moved to time of day, and now it's like, you know, the time of day is all day, right? Because we're always home. And so rethinking about how we deliver our services more than just the electrons, that we can be a leader in that retraining, that we can be a leader in that innovation garnering, and by being that driver, working with the cities, because oftentimes cities aren't prepared. They don't have the staff. They don't have kind of the strategic roadmaps. And so what we are encouraging for other utilities and municipalities is be that driver, because one city can't do it on its own. We have many cities in our jurisdiction. And so by being the essential service, shall we say, we are the one tie that brings our community together, but we also understand what it takes to turn the lights on. And as Kevin mentioned, I mean, some of the most sophisticated things that we're doing are from the utility space, because we have to make sure it works. We're not allowed a downtime to figure things out. And so because of that knowledge, I think we are primed in position to be able to be that leader, to convene the right people, and also make sure that we deliver services to the populations in need. I mean, SMUD created the first ever heat map that overlays 8 data layers to say where in your community are your people most in need, and that's a food deficit, that's jobs, that's transportation. And we have a heat map that will help us determine where to focus resources, and that the cities can use to where to focus their resources and people, because resources will be limited as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Kevin, it looked like you maybe had some things to add to that.
No, I was agreeing.
Yeah, oh, great. Shay?
Yeah, full agreement, frankly. But I think there's a need for, as Nancy was saying, just super localization of both identifying the problems and identifying the solutions and the people who can contribute to implementing those solutions. Because if COVID again taught us anything, it's while the problems might be global, we have to find super local, hyper local solutions, because it's affecting different people really based on where they are socioeconomically, but also where they live. Some communities that had food deserts before this have been hit even worse. They were struggling before. Right. Now it's just exponentially worse, and at some point we have to address, instead of talking about these these broader problems, we have to look at these local circumstances that will define the solutions we bring to bear.
Thank you for that. Andrea.
Well, I will come at it from a different angle. I totally agree with what you just said, both of you. Well, one of the most common problems or failure modes of technology innovation is trying to do too much at once, or trying to start with a data approach across the entire company before trying to get business value out of a smaller set of data. So there was a study earlier this year by MIT and BCG on businesses using AI. Right? They found that 9 out of 10 companies they surveyed had made investments in AI, but only 7 out of 10 have not been able to return any business value from their AI investment so far. The reason this is happening is that companies are focusing on trying to get all of their data and systems standardized before they take the step of applying AI to improve their operations. So the companies that are making money now with AI are doing it a different way. They start with a small subset, it's localized, of their system, and implement a standard at that level. Then they pilot different ways of using AI to get quick returns on investment. So using that approach, AI projects can more than pay for themselves in less than a year. So then when it has been proven at a pilot level, the new technology can be scaled up across the company or across the city. So how the successful companies are meeting communities where they are at is by proving the economics of a new technology at a small scale, through the smallest necessary investment, getting a quick payback, and then scaling up from the proof of concept stage to pilot projects to a full-scale implementation.
No, thank you. I mean, I think that Paula Gold-Williams said in an interview recently, you know, that they really try to like think global but act local. And I think particularly in terms of crisis that, you know, this is the time to be doing a lot of that. And because so many things are digitized, or virtual meetings or virtual collaborations can happen, much like this panel, you know, that really speaks to how we can think global and act local and really tap into those resources, you know, from the entrepreneurs, the intrapreneurs, the industry SMEs, as well as organizations like SMUD that are really committed to driving this collaborative approach. How has sustainable or renewable policies impacted or shaped our current situation? And do you all see a shift in prioritizing progressive moves into renewables or disruptive solutions post-pandemic?
I can just talk from a quick policy perspective, since we're policymakers at SMUD. So we're unique. We're governed by the 7 elected board members, and we are setting the policy for the future. And so, you know, SMUD, you know, just embarked on the most ambitious carbon reduction plan in the country that, you know, So by 2030 and then 2040, having zero carbon emissions from all our power producing, generation, which is much more difficult than people think. People think it's so easy. Let's just turn off all our natural gas power plants. But here in California, as PG&E had rolling blackouts, we stayed, up and running because we had these natural gas power plants. Right. And so how do we retool? How do we reimagine how we use these carbon emitting generation that is our baseload? Right. And so, we are setting forth what's called a moonshot to 2030 and then another moonshot to 2040. And this has scared a lot of people that work at SMUD. This has scared a lot of people who do business with SMUD. Right. If they're not in the renewable space, how will they transact? Right. And so we're having to look at how we do business, but also move forward with this, zero carbon future. And so renewables obviously are going to be a big part of the picture, but we have to make sure that the lights stay on. And so we are pushing that innovation forward as to how can we repurpose, billions of dollars in assets. It's not an easy feat, especially if you're on the coal side. Right. Luckily, we never went on the coal train, but natural gas, even though it's fairly low in terms of carbon emitting, it's still a large contributor. And so we are working internally and externally as to how do we not strand our assets? How do we make sure that we can work with the industry to meet our needs? I mean, biofuel, biogas is just one, but we don't know what the future will hold for us. But because we set these moonshot goals, that's putting us in front of the innovation to say, bring us whatever you have, because we're the first and it's going to be extremely hard without a game changer technology. And so I think by just drawing that line in the sand as a policymaker, that will spur innovation, that will spur entrepreneurship, because there's no way with the technologies we have today that we can get to 2030. Unless we partner and we move forward.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. We are a couple minutes over, so I meant what I said when we could have really split apart. That we could have probably done a WE3 summit on this panel alone. But I'd love to give everyone 20, 30 seconds just to wrap up any final thoughts or things that you didn't get a chance to say before we close out and move on to the next session.
If I may, I suppose just on Nancy's thing on the policy, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So here in Europe, with the whole EU Green Deal, the stimulus dollars, whether that's building renovation to reduce efficiency, grey water systems, investing in carbon capture, because to Nancy's point, gas and oil is not going to go away, and the petrochemical industry is not going to go away. So hopefully our political leaders will have the political will to follow through on this, because some of it will be unpopular, but long term, right?
Agreed. Thank you. Shay.
I guess to sum it up for me, we just need to start to look outside of the industry for some of these solutions, and because as someone said yesterday, the planet will be fine. We're the ones that should worry. So yeah.
Thank you. Andrea.
For innovation, we need to engage more our employees. In any utility, engage your people and engage people outside. Why not? Why not having ideas coming from anywhere? There are ways to do this right, and we'd love to talk with anyone that wants to embark on this journey.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, panelists. It was a treat collaborating with you to have this panel in the first place and then to actually go through it with you. I hope everyone else is really enjoying the rest of the WE3 Summit. Up next, we have a panel that's on expanding global access to sustainable water and energy, which is going to be incredibly thrilling. So with that, everybody, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.